Welcome to Confessions of a Stenographer, where we will focus on all things steno and the state of our profession. Thanks for tuning in. I am your host, Shaunise Day, founder of Steno in the City and founder of this podcast. I hope you all are staying safe out there. I wish you all nothing but the best. I know some of us have been down and out, stressed, trying to adjust to this new normal, the homeschooling, working from home, which is a great thing for some of us and not so great for others. Well, I am here to tell you that I believe that joy is coming, greater is coming, increase is coming, and that new opportunities are on the way. I pray that you all just hang in there and keep believing and speaking good things over your life. I declare that things will come to pass sooner than later for all of us. With that being said, let's get into episode 7 with our next guest. Our next guest is a stellar scopist. This scopist will share the business side of scoping. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Rachel Artis. Hi, Rachel. Welcome to the podcast. Are you ready to confess?
Yes.
Okay, take it away.
Okay, so my name is Rachel Artis. I'm originally from New Jersey. I've lived up and down the East Coast and in a few other countries. I own a scoping agency that scopes and proofs. We do dailies, expedites, regular turnaround. I have personally trained close to 70 scopists on both Case Catalyst and Eclipse. And I come from a family of entrepreneurs and volunteers, so I spend a lot of my time volunteering, teaching the Bible, and also managing and working on my scoping and proofreading business. I originally heard about court reporting from a mentor who was a court reporter, and I asked a few questions, and as soon as he told me, what was involved with it, I found a school, enrolled, and started the next month. So a little bit about what a scopist is. I'm going to define that how my clients that I currently work with define it, and those are two definitions. So the first is a person who compares the pre-recorded audio to the translated steno and adds, removes, moves, and substitutes the words to match exactly what they hear, irregardless of what was pre-typed by the stenographer or entered by the voice writer, unless otherwise instructed. So let me give an example. I see in the transcript the following sentence. I live in a walk-up apartment, but I hear I live in an old walk-up apartment. So they will then add the words and old. So on my team, we call that a reporter who has an audio reliant approach. We will always defer to what we hear versus what we see. Now, the second definition is a little bit different, and it's the opposite of that. It's a person who listens to the pre-recorded audio as a guide to the translated steno that they're reading, but they use the translated steno as the basis for adding, removing, moving, and substituting words. So in that approach, if the sentence is, I live in a walk-up apartment, but they hear, I live in an old walk-up apartment, they will leave the words and old out. They will be omitted and leave what the reporter had originally. And we call that a note reliant approach, and we will mark that in the transcript. So those are the two variations that I see as to what a scopist does and what their job is. So speaking about a scopist can take, or what I would call a good scopist would be an editor that can take a transcript from its raw state and get it as close to final ready as possible. And it shouldn't matter whether it is a very clean file or a very raw file. So I define clean as no steno, punctuation is for the most part in, all of the speakers are identified for the most part correctly, and not a lot of drops. Okay, so that would be a very clean file. A very raw file would have all of the things that I mentioned in it. There is a lot of steno, a lot of untrans, a lot of missing punctuation, missing speakers, missing paragraphs. And so those are things that would make a transcript more raw. But a scopist should know how to get it to that final form, whether it started out clean or it started out more on the raw side, if that makes sense. The second way that I would define a good scopist is someone who knows how to communicate with the reporter to understand what they want and to deliver that. So I have transcripts that if I sent it out to a reporter, they would think I did a horrible job. But if I send it out to the reporter who requested those specific preferences, they would think it was great. And so the biggest part of our job, in my opinion, as a scopist, is to make sure that I am giving the reporter what it is that they're asking for, and I understand what they want, and I'm delivering that. It's not, in my opinion, about which set of rules you follow, which school of thought you come from. It is more of, can I deliver what you're asking me? And do I understand what you're asking me to do? So in my opinion, that's the definition of a good scopist. All right, so I'd like to give a breakdown now of what happens when I get a job. So after I receive a job from a client, I normally confirm audio and confirm receipt with a screenshot of some sort showing that I have it either in my Dropbox account or in my email, and I will confirm it that way. Then the turnaround time depends on what their order is. My average turnaround time is 5 business days from the time of receipt. Now, expedites vary because different agencies, different firms, and different reporters consider different days an expedite. So an attorney might say, I want this expedited, but they really mean they want it next week. Whereas another attorney might say they want it expedited, and for them, that means by 9 p.m. tonight. So I'm going to clarify with the reporter what the order actually is for, and then based on the actual date of delivery that falls under that category of the word expedite, I will charge accordingly. Now, finding my clients now in my business looks a little different than it did when I first started. So now I am pretty much 100% referral based. Because of the pandemic, that's changed how we take work, but most of my regular clients have been with me for at least 2 to 3 years, all the way up to 7 years. So if they refer me to another reporter, then I will, help that reporter out if I can, if our schedule allows. And if I cannot, I will try to refer them to an independent scopist that can address their needs. I don't really use job boards, and I don't go through an agency to secure work. The only time that I will accept work from a job board is if one of my regulars tags me in a post on Facebook, for example, to say, to respond to another reporter that's looking for a scopist. And then from there, I will, communicate with the reporter that was requesting the services and see if we can't help them out. Now, scoping in real time is something that is sort of new because Case Catalyst has introduced the feature of Real Team. It's been around now for, I guess, going on a year and a half, that feature. Before that, we would use work units as a way to receive the files as real time as possible. So the reporter would typically send what we would call a section or a chunk or a portion of the transcript that they'd written at a certain interval of time, maybe lunch, maybe the first morning break, and we would scope it and try our best to keep up with the reporter so that by the time they go off the record, the whole file is completed within 30 minutes to 2 or 3 hours, just depending on, the load, that same day. And yes, that is a service that I provide to my clients. Most of my clients are high volume or official reporters that do a lot of dailies and trials. So we're in that scenario on a regular basis. And now we will tune in for the steno news that you can use.
Steno news that you can use. Guess what? Remember the days of going to a site location to take the written knowledge exam for our national certifications? Pearson VUE? Oh gosh, those days are now behind us. I say it because I have been a few times to take my written exam for the RPR before finally passing it. Starting in October, you will now be able to take all written knowledge exams online. Woohoo! Register between September 1st through the 30th for testing that will run from October 8th through the 22nd. Next up, we have our monthly NCR Town Hall, which will be held September 18th. Be sure to register as soon as possible. And that is your steno news that you can use.
So, when should a new professional start working with a scopist? Some people say that it should be 2 or 3 years after they've been reporting. Some say longer. And some say that they can just go right out and engage a scopist. I don't like to decide what that is because people's circumstances and their finances dictate different things. Maybe they just graduated, they have a lot of debt, and they have agencies that are ready to hire them right away. They've networked or they've made those relationships and connections that make them super busy right away. And they legitimately don't have the time to scope their own work. And so in that circumstance, they may decide, I need a scopist right away. And then there are some reporters that will follow that advice, take the 2 to 3 years to scope their own work, learn their own software, which is really going to be the difference that they need before they engage a scopist that will make that process a lot easier. So there's different schools of thought. I don't think anyone is right or wrong. It's just that your approach, depending on which avenue you take, should be considered. So if you are a new professional and you're trying to work with a scopist, realize that so that you won't run into the nightmare issue of your files not getting completed on time, deadlines being missed, you sent a file and now you hear nothing back, or you get your work back but you're still spending hours rescoping and working on the file to get it to the point that it needs to be. To avoid that, my recommendation is just to have an honest conversation with the scopist that you're trying to engage and realize that this is a relationship that needs to be fostered and worked on as you grow as a new professional. And you should definitely work with a veteran scopist if you're going to do that. And they will be able to tell you how to improve your dictionary. They should be able to edit your work a little more quickly because they have a good handle on their own software and things that will make things easier. And, working with a trainer or someone to help you make sure that your shortcuts, your macros, accelerators, all of those things are as they should be and those settings are correct. And because the work is going to take a longer period of time, I would also recommend engaging a proofreader or making sure that you proofread it yourself, because the scopist is going to be making so many changes because it's more of a raw style transcript than maybe your 20-year veteran reporter who is a lot more accurate in their steno notes. So those are my opinions on that. Now, for new professionals that are considering a scopist when the time is right, my number one piece of advice there is to not let the rhetoric that we see in the industry affect how you approach the relationship. Scopists, a lot of times, have a bad reputation because the communication is so sorely lacking. And because of that, as a professional, a new professional, you want to start the process off treating a scopist as an investment into your business, not as a drop-off service, because you're not going to get your expectations met. It can ruin your reputation to trust someone implicitly without growing the relationship and making sure they understand what you want your transcripts to look like, and making sure that you're having those conversations on a regular basis. If you don't have the time to do that, and it doesn't have to be time consuming, it doesn't have to be a conversation every transcript, but there should be some dialogue and some willingness on both parties to get your transcripts where they need to be. So treat it as an investment, and know that with any investment, it takes time to cultivate the relationship so that you can get return on your investment. And so that would be the approach that I would take. Not everyone is going to be a perfect fit for each other. Realize that your first scopist is probably not going to be the scopist you stay with, forever, for your whole career. And be willing to go through that journey and go through those steps to get the fit that you're looking for, where you can confidently, put your name on the bottom of, that transcript, which is the work that they've done. So that would be my advice there. When it comes to a solid team between the reporter and the scopist, a lot goes into that. And it can seem, because of what we see on social media and how the industry gets represented with that reporter and scopist dynamic on social media, that it is just easy peasy 1, 2, 3 fit. There's polarizing ideas about that. So I can only speak to the relationships that I have and have had with reporters. And the most successful ones are what I kind of stated before: great communication and understanding that, this is a collaborative effort to get the transcript met, or the transcript delivery time met with the most accuracy possible. And, having those conversations, having that communication, and being precise in that, because a lot of what we deal with in our industry, or in our daily work, is not spoken, right? You're thinking in your head, oh, maybe I need to make this look like this, or I read this from this post, or okay, I want it to look like this. But a lot of these are all conversations that you're having independently in your own mind, as well as the scopist. And so a lot of times, having those conversations gets you to actually talk out what it is that you want. And you've never done that before. You've never articulated it in that way. And the same for the scopist. The scopist may have been working with reporters that really aren't big on communication. And as long as they're not getting negative feedback, they just keep going and keep doing what they're used to and what they're getting paid for. So having that communication can be tricky, because sometimes both parties have never really articulated this process at all. It's been inner dialogue that's been going on in their head, sometimes for years. And so that is, to me, what makes a good team, where the scopist knows how to articulate what they're doing, the reporter knows how to articulate what they did on the record, what they want, what the scopist should trust in when they see, not trust in, when they, want to change it or alter it, and just those ongoing conversations, because we have, like I said, a lot of concepts and ideas about rules and styles and layout and format, but we actually don't communicate verbally with anyone about it. And so to me, my best relationships with reporters are when we actually verbalize it, and I get that, oh, you know what? Yeah, that is what that's called. Or, wow, I really like the way you phrase that, because, I experience it every day, but I don't verbalize it. It's just like a thing, And so for me, that was what helped me to grow as a scopist, was figuring out how to articulate this repetitive thing that I keep seeing, but don't have anyone to really discuss that with. So I'm assuming, the reporter is assuming, and we all know what happens when that's done too much, and it can go bad. So the greatest relationships are when I take the time, that could be email, phone conversation, what have you, that articulates different things that I'm seeing, and the reporter feels comfortable to do that. I feel comfortable to do that with them, and it's no judgment. It's not like an accusatory negative feedback. These are things that happen in the real world of doing our job every day that need to be discussed, and we need to come to an agreement on it. And so if you can remove the negativity from the conversation, or the, oh, I don't want to let them know that I saw this mistake. Sometimes that thing right there, oh, I didn't want to tell them. I saw that, but I didn't want to tell you. 9 times out of 10, it could be an inadvertent thing. It could be a tech issue. It could be something they were unaware of. And instead of trying to preserve the person's feelings, get comfortable with articulating it, you really get into a in sync manner of moving through the relationship, and it ends up being profitable for both parties. And that to me is one of the greatest dynamics that I can have with a reporter. So my advice for a new scopist, because I train scopists, that's like a really hard topic for me to succinctly answer, but I will try my best to give advice on, what it takes to build a great reputation when it comes to scoping. And so realize, one, that your reputation is not based on the one reporter that you work for. Let's say your first client is great. You're a great fit. They love your work. You love their work. You're getting paid on time. You agree on your rates. Everything is great. Most reporters don't want to tell anybody about you. If you have a good relationship, I have reporters to this day that refuse to refer me, not because we have a bad relationship, but because they don't want someone else to take up so much of my time with their work. So your reputation comes from working with several reporters. And when you work with several reporters, and the ones that don't end up working out is where your reputation starts. Okay. So it's when you work with that reporter and you're like, you know what, this is not a good fit. I'm not as profitable as I'd like to be working with this reporter, or they don't respond to my questions. I don't feel comfortable to come to them when I see an issue, and we're going to have to part ways. That's where your reputation starts. So the advice is to make sure that you treat every reporter, because you don't know in the beginning whether it's going to work out or not. Treat them in a way that will preserve your reputation. So the best way I can explain that is to give a brief scenario of something that happened during the pandemic with a client that was interested in working with my team. So a really skilled, professional, great reputation reporter reached out to us and contacted us to do I believe it was 200 to 300 page expedite. And we were contacted Saturday afternoon, and delivery would have been between 9 and 12 on Monday morning. So typically my rule is no expedites on the first job that I do with a reporter. There's just way too many things that can go wrong. And it also is a recipe to ruin my reputation, because I've never worked with them before. I don't know what they want. And my final may look nothing like what they expect. And I'm charging them double what I would normally charge. So the stakes are higher. We're not comfortable with one another. We don't know how things are going to go. But what I did say was, because we were in, the midst of the pandemic, and it was hard to find a scopist, and there was just a lot going on, I wanted to be sympathetic to the situation. So I asked for a look at the file. Can you please send me the file that you would like to, engage me for, so I can get a feel to see if I can get this delivered to you on Monday morning? Because again, no preferences, I have nothing to go on to know whether this is actually feasible. And, after some back and forth, they weren't really willing to send the file without my confirmation that I would accept the job. And behind the scenes, as a team, we hadn't worked consistently in probably 2.5 months due to the pandemic. So we were rusty. And, I can acknowledge that. And I can also acknowledge, for reporters that are used to going out working every day, they're going to be rusty as well, right? So you're taking a potentially really difficult transcript and asking for it to be delivered in a really short window, and nobody's worked in 2 months. And on top of that, one of our team members had passed away due to complications from COVID. So the team as a whole was, very emotional, to say the least, about that. And I knew that the work would be affected. And so because of that, I said, this is a tight turnaround time. We haven't worked in 2.5 months. I cannot guarantee you that I can deliver a final to you at the deadline and it be something that you and I are both happy with. So at this time, I would like to just decline. Well, the reporter was not happy with that response because the answer was no, right? But I preserved my reputation because my gut told me this is not the time to try to develop a new relationship with all of these things kind of going on in the background. Now, she wasn't privy to those things, and I wasn't going to take it upon myself to tell her all of those things, but those are the things that I consider. So my advice, when you're trying to build that reputation is, if you have to say no, say no. It's better to not take the job and know your limits and show your maturity and your professionalism, and the person not be happy in that moment, than to promise something that you're not sure if you can deliver on. And I think that is the benchmark, if you will, of developing a great reputation. If the reporter respects you, they'll come back later. I have that happen all the time. I say no, or I'm booked, my schedule is full, whatever the reason is, several times a week sometimes. That doesn't keep me from having an income, and it also preserves my reputation. So that would be my advice. And I know it might sound kind of cliche, but saying no more than you say yes in this business contributes to you having a great reputation, even if it's a no but, or no but this, or no but can I, whatever it may be. Because a lot of times what I see that happens is Scopists say yes to too many things that they're not sure they can deliver on, and that's where the reputation just tanks. So say if they're asking you to do something and you're not sure if you quite understand where they're coming from, I always tell my team, a reporter speaks or writes in 2 languages in the same day, steno and English. So sometimes emails don't quite make sense. Text messages don't quite make sense. They've got a lot going on in their mind. And so don't try to pretend that you understand where they're coming from or what they want their transcript to look like when you really don't. So what I do is I'll say, I think I'm following where you're coming from on this preference. I'm going to do it and then send you a screenshot. Let me know if that's what you were speaking of. So confirm. Don't promise and just yes them to death. They may be happy in the moment, but if it comes about that they start to realize that your yeses are empty, that is going to contribute to you having a negative reputation in the industry. So any advice that I would give working reporters that can improve the back end of scoping, my number one tip is know your software. And if you think you know your software, I can almost promise you that you don't. And I can say that because if you go into some of the software groups on Facebook and you see the questions that are being asked, the majority of the people in that group are working reporters, and they're really not 100% sure of what their software is capable of. If the way that they edit never allows them to see the 7 other ways that can be done more efficiently, they will think that they know the software well. And in reality, maybe they don't. And so I would say improving things on the back end for a scopist, in my opinion, 70% of that starts with knowing the software. So that would be my number one tip. piece of advice for improving the back end of scoping. Because what that does, what that translates to is a scopist not doing repetitive, tedious corrections that distract them from what you're paying them to do, which is listen to the audio or look at your steno notes and make sure that the context, the content, and what they hear is all congruent. If I'm changing a contraction 25 times on one page, I cannot humanly see the other areas that you're actually paying me to fix. And those go back to software issues. So if you tighten up those settings and you get the software training that you need, then you will not have those issues on the back end for the scopist, and you'll get a better looking final. So that's kind of my advice on that. So during this pandemic, it has been very challenging. We've had to make decisions about how booked we want to be, how busy we'd like to be. If we, want to take everything, we want to work with lots of new reporters that we've never worked with. And those decisions have been hard, but thankfully, we've been able to make the best decisions for our clients and make sure that the work that we're taking and that we're returning is quality. So we are still actively working. We are, I'm going to say maybe at 70% capacity compared to what we were pre-pandemic. Pre-pandemic, we were probably going into like 3 or 4 arbitrations at the same time. So now, we're not doing as many arbitrations and trials and things like that. And I've made a conscious decision to not do that because I wouldn't be able to deliver that same quality at that same speed just yet. Maybe by the time October, November comes, we'll be back up to pace and we can do that. We can handle that. But for right now, we're staying busy with proofing, regular turnaround time, and just kind of re-solidifying our skill set since we had, that big gap. So that's kind of how we're handling, the pandemic and the after effects of that. So on a more personal note, the job that we do is very busy, very time consuming. It can be very stressful. So I have some hobbies that I like to do to kind of break up the monotony, so to speak. And one of those things is really just reading. We've been practicing social distancing. So I read about 3 to 4 books a week. I really like getting outside into nature and walking and just enjoying that as kind of a reset. So I call them like my COVID hobbies. Look a little bit different than my pre-COVID hobbies, which were really traveling a lot. I love to travel with my family. So right now, we can't have that, but those are some of the hobbies that I like to do right now. I like to read a lot. I love learning during this time. We actually took a month off and took a lighter load as a team to actually study punctuation on a deeper level using Margie Wakeman Wells' discounted class that she was offering. I think it was like March, April. And so we took that, and that was so refreshing to give us time to just really hone in on our skills. So learning for me is a hobby. I know that sounds kind of weird, but that really truly is one of my hobbies. I really like to encourage the industry and the profession because we're in a really strange time. A lot of reporters don't feel secure because there's the threat of all different types of things. The threats of, digital recording and these companies that are kind of taking over, and there's just a lot of uncertainty. And what I can offer as advice as a scopist from my perspective is that there's a lot of uncertainty as well for a scopist, because if a reporter or a stenographer is not sending me a transcript, I have nothing to edit. But what I realize is that honing your skills, working on them, using your voice to be positive and to be vocal about things that aren't discussed in a positive way is really what the industry and the profession needs. And I think that will help to either transfer the skills that we have now to something that will still financially serve your family, or something that will be your next chapter. And that's what's appreciated. Those people that contribute to our industry in a positive way, explain things simply, and try to pull back that curtain are the most refreshing to me. And I know it can be a little scary because, it's kind of volatile in some areas in the industry. But I believe that positivity and transparency, which is something that is so desperately needed, will really carry the industry through the times that we're facing. And last thing I'd like to share is what I would like to do after all of this pandemic is over. As I mentioned before, I love to travel. I had a trip planned to the Philippines for May, but I had been planning it the whole year. And of course that got canceled. So my goal is to have that trip. I live there for a short time. I have friends and extended family there that I can't wait to visit. And that is what I can't wait to do. So that's all I have for today. I hope that everyone enjoyed it and was able to benefit from it.
Rachel, I just want to say thank you so much. I'm just sitting here just smiling, listening to you, and you did a fantastic job. I thank you so much for confessing, and I will talk to you soon.
Thank you so much, Shaunise.
You're welcome. I would like to thank everyone that took the time to check out this podcast. You are appreciated. This podcast was designed just for you and to add value to our profession. Until then, stay motivated and encouraged. Peace and blessings.